So without any further ado, please let's have a round of applause for Dr.
Thank you and good afternoon. I gave this particular title when I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about, so the subtitle here is a little more accurate, An Ode to STEM and Continuous Learning, and you might say The Ascent of Humans would be another title for it. So my thesis here is the following, and that is that the reason we aren't in caves writing on the walls and hunting things occasionally is due to technology, or using the current popular phrase STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I'm going to present a little evidence for that and play a little game with it. And then I'm going to show you a couple of examples of areas that I think are very important in the ascent of humans. I'm only going to do two. There are a lot of them, but you know, it's a short talk. So I'll start by reminding you, if you don't remember, that Time magazine and their collaborators present a Man of the Year or Human of the Year every year. And at the end of the last century that we were all a part of, they did a Man of the Century. And of course they could have chosen from huge numbers of people, naturally. They could have chosen a famous politician, a famous religious figure, a famous military person, you name it. But of course, they chose Albert Einstein. And so that was emblematic of the theme that I'm trying to push now. Of all the things that went on in the last century, they thought that he represented the things that carried man forward the most. And I think that that's probably true. And there are many of the scientists involved in the ascent of man, ascent of humans, but he's certainly a good image. So now you can play a game if you want to with your STEM friends or your students or your children. You can try to guess people that you like that were involved in the ascent of humans technically over the years. And I'll show a few examples, but you can think up your own favorite examples. Isaac Newton usually makes most lists. In the 16 to 1700s, he invented the laws or discovered the laws of motion and gravitation at the time, optics, and the calculus, along with Leibniz. Very important advances that helped bring us to where we are. And if you go back into the 15 to 1600s, Galileo is a popular figure to talk about. He really brought about astronomy with the invention of the telescope. He supported heliocentrism, the Earth going around the sun, invented the military compass, and showed the equivalency of different falling bodies of different weights, that they fall at the same rate. And if you continue going back in the 14 to 1500s, of course, this is the guy who first told us that the Earth goes around the sun, when it was a very unpopular thing to say. It could get you killed. In fact, Galileo got house arrest for that. But nevertheless, an important step. So you can invent your own. Maybe you like Gutenberg for movable type. There are a lot of examples you can bring up. And if you continue to go back, of course, there are other very important events that we don't have names for. For instance, one very important transition for humans was going from the hunter-gatherer society to the agricultural society, a major advance. We don't have a person's name for that. There are probably a number of people involved in that in different societies. But it certainly involved, in important ways, increases of human knowledge to do that. They had to have tools to farm, and probably stone tools in the beginning. They had to know something about basic biology, the plants, what's going to grow, what can I eat that won't kill me or cause other problems, and what's going to grow in this particular area. And they had to know something about climatology and something about astronomy to gauge when the growing season would happen, and when to plant, when to harvest. And so knowledge had to develop to enable that transition to happen, even though we don't put a name with it. So now I'm going to transition to talking about the two things I promised, and as I said in my original title, I'll try to put a little bit of a local flavor in these two items as well. So the first thing I'm going to pick to talk about is materials. Very important. in the ascent of humans, and in fact so important that we have named some ages of man after materials. Of course, I've already mentioned stones, because stones were probably used as the tools for our agricultural transition. So the Stone Age occurred from prehistory to about 4000 BCE, and then they call the Bronze Age from about 4000 to about 1000 BCE, and that involves mixing copper basically with some other elements. And then the Iron Age from about 1200 BCE to 600 CE. So that's an example of the importance that people put with materials, and you see what's starting to happen in the last age, iron, mentioned here, is that we're discovering the elements. And this finally came, I believe, to fruition with Mendeleev in 1869. Mendeleev discovered or invented, brought about the periodic table of the elements, which took the elements that we had learned about at that point, and there were some that were sort of obvious in nature that we could learn about: gold, silver, iron, a few others. And he put those into an organized chart, and that suggested the others that we should be able to find. And indeed that was right. And so we developed a periodic table of the elements that contains all the elements that exist. And in fact, we're still adding to that. We're adding unstable elements at the end. In fact, we've added 5 elements since the year 2000. These are very unstable. They only last about a millisecond or so, so don't worry about having to handle those. But at any rate, the reason the elements are very important is that everything else is made of them. Of course, everything, all of you sitting in the room, everything else that's around us is made of combinations of those elements in various ways. And so we get to all the materials that we know of today. Locally, a number of things go on around here with respect to elements or materials that are very important. Of course, you remember SUNY Polytechnic Institute, first called the School of Nanoscale Sciences in '01, and then the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering was brought about in '04. This deals with materials at a very small scale, a scale at which quantum mechanics becomes very important, and a scale which is very important for our whole microelectronics industry, which is a bedrock for our modern society, modern technology. Everything we do just about depends on that. And of course, mentioning, whoops, this thing wants to jump. Mentioning that in the second line, Semitech, which is a consortium of companies, and I've listed them there, that deal with microelectronics, came here in 2002. Partly, of course, because of SUNY Polytechnic. And then, of course, the Global Foundries chip fab, which makes these microelectronic circuits in great quantity, came in '09. And then just last year, New York State formed a consortium around a new material for electronics, silicon carbide, that's intended to make a new generation of electronics for high power uses. And so we see materials in the local area in important ways. You can name others, of course. Metals and alloys are very important generally. Polymers, plastics, we have Savic in polymers here. We have Momentum Materials in silicone polymers. The biological materials are becoming more and more important in our society. We have developed genetic engineering techniques to produce drugs for humans that are becoming more and more important for us. We're even beginning to develop biological materials and forms of biological materials that may be able to produce new organs for us when our old ones wear out. That's something we're being worked on right now. So materials in many forms are very important in the ascent of man. So I'll say one other thing about materials that intrigues me, because when I went to school, we knew what the universe was made of. It was made of matter and energy. In fact, we call that matter now baryonic matter. But we knew that was in the textbooks, no problem. In recent years, since I graduated, we have found that the universe contains 27% dark matter and 68% dark energy, leaving only 5% for all the stuff that I was told when I went to school it was made of. That was the normal matter. But since it's only 5%, maybe it's the abnormal matter. And the interesting thing about these very recent discoveries in the materials area is that we have no idea right now what dark matter and dark energy consist of. There are a lot of experiments, a lot of discussions going on in physics and cosmology, astronomy, trying to answer that question. What are they made of? Since most of the universe is now composed of unknown material. Very interesting. We'll see what happens. Right now, we don't know that it's going to have any effect on the ascent of humans, but who knows what we're going to find out. So going to the second topic. And this is, I'm going to jump way over for my second example to the immaterial. And here I'm talking about knowledge, data, information, which is itself immaterial. Of course, it always resides on something material, like in your head or in a computer, but it's in itself immaterial. But it's a great example, of course, of something that's brought about the ascent of humans. I've already mentioned the increases of knowledge necessary to go from the agricultural society, the hunter-gatherer society, to the agricultural one. But if you haven't already read this quote by Schilling, I think it is really interesting. It's called the knowledge doubling curve, and Buckminster Fuller first noticed that about knowledge doubling was occurring of human knowledge about every century before 1900. That was his estimation. But by the end of World War II, knowledge was doubling every 25 years. Today, things aren't as simple. Different things double at different rates, but people have tried to estimate it. For instance, nanotechnology knowledge is doubling every 2 years, clinical knowledge every 18 months, general human knowledge now every 13 months. Pretty fast. However, according to IBM, the build-out of the Internet of Things, which I'll say more about in a moment, will lead to the doubling of knowledge every 12 hours. How are we going to deal with it if that's the case? The Internet of Things, what is this thing that's going to cause all this trouble? Well, it's also called the Industrial Internet. GE has estimated that it's going to add 15 to 16 trillion to the global GDP in the next 2 decades. There are already some 10 billion connected devices on the internet, and that number will probably go to 50 billion by 2020. The point is that the internet, which of course we're familiar with and which we're connected to, is getting connected to devices, machines, things. And there are many more things, devices, and machines on Earth than there are people. Even though there are a lot of people, it's a whole lot more machines. They're all getting connected to the internet to talk to us and to talk to each other, to record their information, and so forth. And so that's the Internet of Things, or the Industrial Internet, and it's being rapidly developed right now, and a lot of companies are putting in efforts. In fact, some local companies, GE, IBM, with AT&T, Cisco, and Intel, launched the Industrial Internet Consortium just about a year ago, and it's, when I looked it up this week, it's at 157 members right now as of this week from what I read. And so that's the Internet of Things that's going to bring about this knowledge doubling every 12 hours, which is going to be a problem to keep up with. What's going to be the consequence of that? Well, that's where my last plea of continuous learning for all of us comes in. If you don't keep up, you're going to get left behind, whatever field you're in, with this sort of thing happening. People ask the question, are computers to blame for this doubling too? And yes is the answer. Yeah, they're to blame, but they're also part of the solution. We have to have computers to deal with all of this data, and yes, computers bring about the production of the data as well, so it's a circular problem. As computers get more powerful, the problem increases, and so specialization in all fields will increase, as it certainly, you probably noticed it in the medical field. You'll notice it more and more in all fields, because the human brain cannot take in what's going to be happening in the future. We have to have a lot of help from computers and whatever else we can bring about. So I'll end with a quote I like. and this was by a guy who lived around the turn of the century, who was a public official. I think he was Secretary of War and Mayor of Cleveland at one point, but I like his quote: "The man who graduates today and stops learning tomorrow is uneducated the next day." And that's a plea for continuous learning, and you just see why that's true, except now we're going to have to modify his quote. "The man who graduates today and stops learning tomorrow is uneducated in 12 hours. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Question.
How you going?
Is the industrial internet wired separately from the common internet, or are they connected together so that there's crosstalk all the time?
They're connected together. Now, there are...
Be a mistake.
I'm sorry about that, but yeah, they are wired together because humans want to have access to all of this machine-generated information for many reasons. But there are, I mean, the internet is a complex thing. There are subordinate internets that can be sealed off from the main internet that we're all familiar with for various purposes. For instance, the military maintains an internet which is sealed away from the other internets because of security reasons. And people still try to get into it, obviously, but...
I'm interested in your opinion between or from the government gathering all sorts of data that they may or may not be entitled to the concern over AI autonomy as we progress more and more, to the development of weaponry that we may or may not truly understand the implications of. How much is this doubling of knowledge every 12 hours going to be a problem, given that we are often not wise enough to use that knowledge?
Well, that's a very big philosophical question. If I really knew the answer to that, I should be running for the next election for president, at least, I think. But good question. I don't know the answer. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. It's going to happen. And so we're going to have to deal with it. Yeah, knowledge is power for good and evil. Technology is power for good and evil. So it's up to us as humans to deal with it, to figure it out. That's about all of a quick answer I can give to that, but I think you could have a day discussion around your topic there.
I see three more quickly.
Yeah, my question is, if Internet of Things will double knowledge in 12 hours, can you define what this knowledge is? Is it real knowledge or just information about your appliances?
It is all of that stuff, you know. The way they're using the word, it's a very encompassing word. You may not call it knowledge at all if you put a value system behind knowledge. A lot of it is just what you might call data about things and can be dispensed with. And in fact, that's one of the solutions to the problem that people are proposing. We're going to get an onslaught of data. We can't store it all anymore. We don't know how to store what's going to be coming at us, so we can't keep it, but we want to keep, obviously, the parts of it that are valuable to the ascent of humans and are valuable to people. And so being able to distinguish that, which is what you're asking for, distinguishing the good from the useless, is a big problem. And there's a lot of work going on right now to try to do that at sources, at the machines, at other sources where the data is generated, trying to analyze it quickly there and discard on the fly that which is useless. And that way we can cull it down to something more manageable. Hopefully we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Awesome. Again, we're going to have more questions we can answer now, and we are going to continue this conversation as we go. But let me get a couple more in. Yeah, sir.
Okay. You kind of already answered it about storage and discerning what. But another topic is we have all this data, which is awesome in a sense, but accessibility to that data isn't widespread. What kind of insights do you have on bridging accessibility?
Yeah. I mean, that's an important social question because there have been a lot of arguments made that with the importance that the internet is gaining, all citizens ought to have access, and obviously all don't. Some countries are actually making it a policy at this point to make sure that all of their citizens get access to the internet. Ours hasn't done that yet, but it's an important problem, and I think it deserves a lot of attention personally, and I think we do need to give equal access as much as possible.
Well, with that hopeful vision that we can carry forward, thank you, Dr. Gray.